Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I'm going to be going over the 10 most overused troops in Gems of War PvP. It has been a while since I've done a top 10 video, and this has been requested quite a bit. And instead of just basing it off of whatever my opinion is of the best 10, we actually have some data this time for the top 10 video. Leah recently, a couple weeks back, ended up making a leaderboard thing on our website of Ashtender that goes over all the database and everything. And here is the top 50 as far as what ended up getting used in PvP. So I put all these in an Excel spreadsheet, and here are those top 10. Of course, this is mainly looking at the end game, because a good majority of these people who have a lot of battles are related to the end game. So let's just get into it. For number 10, we have Emperor Corvash. This would probably be a lot higher if it was to only track the console side. Emperor Corvash is mainly on here probably for two various teams. One is the fact that it's used in both brown and blue Guild War days, and Guild War does indeed count as PvP battles, so that is greatly increasing the usage of Emperor Corvash. The other factor, of course, is just within one of its most infamous teams, which is this Corvash, Valkyrie, Justice, and Queen Mab. It's also occasionally used within the context of Corvash, Valkyrie, Mercy, Queen Mab, which is what was done before Justice was ever added into the game. And this data does go back before that as well. So Corvash, of course, one of the main reasons why he is actually on here. He has true damage, which is always good. He stuns 2 enemies. He fully drains 2 enemies, both of which are really decent. And he's the best stunner in the entire game, with the fact of his last trait, which every single time you gain an extra turn off those 4 times and 5 times, plus he ends up stunning a random enemy, which of course later in the game, essentially every trait or every troop is running with all 3 traits, so that is pretty useful just to make sure you don't have to deal with them. In number 9, we have Def. This is a little bit of an older one, mainly from probably old data, because Def, prior to the Def Mark nerf that he got, was pretty used quite a bit. One of the other thing that this is probably coming up from quite a bit is being used within the context of Famine plus Def. Also, Def is used independently from a Famine quite often, which is a Valkyrie. The main thing why he is used a decent amount, there's 2 really kind of concepts that make him work. He has Def Mark, which of course places Def Mark on all enemies. What a Def Mark does is every single turn there's a 10% chance that the enemy will die. The nerf that has occurred to this recently, which is one of the reasons why it's not being used as much anymore, is he now has a, as well as all Def Marks, now have a 1-turn delay before it can kill with the Def Mark. One other thing to note is if a troop is already Def Marked and it gets re-Def Marked, it'll still maintain that 1-turn delay, which makes it pretty bad if you keep reapplying it. Though the other reason it's used for, well, for one, it's Necromancy. It's actually, out of every single troop with the 50% Necromancy, it is the absolute strongest out of all of them. The other aspect is it does 2 true damage to the first troop every single turn, which of course is good with Famine Def combo. The other thing this is notably used for is with a Crimson Bat and first slot. This allows your Crimson Bat to essentially have a 100% chance to always do 2 times skull damage, assuming that both the Def and the Crimson Bat are fully traded, which is quite potent to just randomly be able to do 2 times skull damage to every troop. One other thing to note specifically about Crimson Bat, even though he isn't on this list, is Crimson Bat is the only troop in the entire game currently that is capable of 2 times skull damaging every single troop in the game, with no exception. And Def just allows that to be done a little bit easier than what he'd normally be able to do. For number 8, we have Sylvanimora. The main reason why this thing is used a lot is Scion is very strong right now. Scion, of course, has the ability to mana drain all enemies, but the main thing that Sylvanimora counters on it is the fact that Scion can steal all your mana whenever it takes skulls. One thing to note about Scion's ability, and quite a few within the game, almost all of them, and the ones that don't are glitch, is when a troop is entangled, it should, and assuming that it's working correctly, it should not be able to apply its Staz effect to you. Whenever an enemy has an on-skull effect like Scion, where it steals all mana, or if they have like Inflame, where they go and put burn on you whenever they take a skull, this will not trigger if they have 0 attack, either by reducing it down to 0 or by entangling them, which of course makes them 0 attack for a short duration of time. So this will make it so essentially a Scion cannot do anything. at least for the duration of it. One other thing to note though is if it takes a 4 times or 5 times while entangled, since it will then do 1 or 2 damage respectively, it will end up getting off the drain. But assuming it just takes a single 3 pair while entangled, it will not be able to apply the status effect. So that's why Sylvanimora is used. The other reason is it's used within the context of an all-dragon team. It is indeed, of course, an all-dragon. It has an okay ability, pretty lackluster. It's mainly just used for the fact that it's a dragon and the fact that it has that entangle, and is the best first slot entangler in the game as of this current state. Dragon Soul, this is not to anyone's surprise. Dragon Soul, of course, is essentially the best soul farmer that you can put on your team, and it gains 15 souls per cast. It accumulates a lot of the mana back from its explosion. It also has the highest damage output of any troop earlier on in the game, capable of dealing a total of 80 damage to the enemy team, even at level 1. If you find this thing at like level 30, you're pretty much good to go for a very long time, since your max hit would then be essentially 80 damage to the enemy team, 20 each. It boosts based on each dragon for 3 times. It boosts off itself, so that's a default of 11 damage to all enemies, even with no dragons on the team. And as I mentioned, 20 to all is its cap with full dragons. It's also really undependent to magic, so even as I mentioned earlier on in the game, it will get less explosions, but all of its damage is based on how many dragons, not what its magic actually is, whereas about 99% of the troops in the game are dependent based on their magic, whereas a Dragon Soul is dependent based on the amount of dragons, and that combination just makes it really strong as far as damage and soul output. As far as traits, it's pretty average. It's mainly all defensive traits. It has protection against mana drain, or mana burn, I mean. Mana burn isn't really too common these days. Queen Mab's about the only thing you really see it on. Huge trait to make it a little bit harder to kill, and of course possession for the chance to not die, which can always come in handy, and use it as a slight tank, probably in 2nd or 3rd slot. Spirit Fox. The reason why Spirit Fox is so used, I believe the person, Macaulay, who has the most wins in the entire game, or most invade wins, actually uses a Spirit Fox as one of her main troops. The biggest reason for this, among many others, is it's currently, I would say, the best counter to a Scion, at least, or mana generators in general. Drainers, I mean. A good majority of mana drainers are yellow. Things like Cockatrice, Famine, all the others, Moloch, a few others I probably can't think of off the top of my head, all end up using yellow mana, and the best way generally to deal with these, or just any mana generator, mana drainer, is big difference between a mana generator and a mana drainer. To counter mana drainers is to drain them before they drain you. So Spirit Fox can do that. The main thing that makes this possible is it has Empowered. It is the only mana drain currently in the game that is empowered, which means you start with it from the very first turn, but also makes it pretty nice as stealthy, so as you're accumulating the mana to your Spirit Fox, it can't be mana drained by single target drainers such as a Moloch or a Cockatrice or a Spider Queen or any of the other single target ones, so it'll be safe, meaning that only things like Scion and Famine would be able to actually drain it, which you could just prioritize by draining them first. It also deals true damage, which is pretty nice, and it removes all yellow from the board, which I think almost half the drainers in the game, about at least a third of them, end up using yellow, so it's really nice to be able to counter that out. Next up, we have Gorgotha. This now mana generator. This is a mana generator, and normally known as the absolute best mana generator in the game. It explodes a bunch of gems and then cleanses itself. No clue why it randomly got that buff, but it makes it really nice. It got that buff a couple months ago, and its usage has definitely increased since then, even though it was already pretty overused before. The fact that it can cleanse itself means you don't have to deal with freeze, you don't have to deal with stun, which I believe is the main reason why they added it, to make sure it couldn't be stunned as easily. It has one of the highest skull mitigations in the game. Even though it's not the highest, it's the most viable troop that has the highest mitigation, because if you use a stone hammer, it doesn't really work out that well, and the one that has 40% agile will, for one, not always trigger the agile, and it's not really as good as a Gorgotha is overall. But yeah, Gorgotha, really huge mana generator. It essentially gains all of its mana back, plus almost all of your team's mana. Really good. Has a hard counter of Scion, unfortunately, which is overused right now, mainly because Gorgotha is also overused quite a bit. One thing to note about Gorgotha, though, is it's really bad on your defend team. Don't ever bother putting it on it. Definitely use other options before invading. It is one of the most solid, consistent choices there is in the game for a frontline tank. For number 4, we have Bombot. This is slightly dated, but still applicable. Bombot, the main reason why this is, it might seem odd to some people, it is a common after all. I believe it's actually the only common on this entire list. Spirit Fox was an ultra rare. But this is the lowest rarity of anything on the list. It's mainly because of its ridiculously high damage output. It does kill itself after it casts, but because of this, it gets a excessively high skewed damage, and it's boosted based on its armor. And this can be buffed, of course, with armor buffers, and of course you can only cast it once, because once you do, it dies, though you can use multiple bomb bots on a team. What makes this really nice is it has 2 random explosions. This gives you some board controls on top of your high damage output, so even something that a Rowan doesn't have, where she has a very similar damage to the bomb bots, she doesn't actually have any extra turn or mana generation capabilities. Once she casts her thing, you have a 100% chance you end your turn, and you won't be able to get any mana, whereas a bomb bot still has that slight chance that it will do something. As far as traits, it's pretty much abysmal. It's mainly just used for that excessively high damage. What used to be done in the past, which is still kind of possible, it's surprisingly more possible now than it was a couple months back. Now that they lowered, essentially before there was ever any troop bonuses, this team was used a lot, like right when Bombot first came out. But then it started not being used as much, because once 25% and 50% bonus troops came into the game, double Bombot wasn't really able to kill them. The main team it was ran with was Deep Bore, Double Bombot, and Black Manacles, using Mechanist class fully traded. Was one of the quickest wins I know of back in the day. Still can do it, not as effectively, but as I was saying, back when 25% and 50% came into the game, it wasn't able to actually kill them with 2 bomb bots. But now that it's only a 10% and 20%, the bomb bot team is kind of making a comeback a little bit, mainly because no one's really running, well, it's impossible to run like 50% stats anymore, and the highest you could ever have is 20%, and most people don't even bother with the bonuses anymore. So Bombot is making a bit of a comeback. Of course, some of this data is based on the actual previous data where it was amazing, but still definitely applicable. Not really usable in early game, despite it being a common and needing no traits. That might seem a little odd, but the main reason that actually made Bombot strong was having a very high armor. And of course, the earlier you are in the game, the less armor kingdoms you actually have, and that would drastically decrease the amount of damage you would actually do. So, one thing to note about these top 3 that we're about to get into, these are substantially higher than every other thing you've seen. Also, the number 1 is 3 times more used than number 3. So yeah, it is, these 3 are like exponentially higher. If you were to listen to any 3 as the best 3, these are likely them. Most of them probably won't be much of a surprise. One of them might be to early game players though. So number 3, a Valkyrie. This one's no surprise at all. This is pretty much honestly, if I was to put one troop as the face of Gems of War, it would probably be a Valkyrie. Valkyrie, ever since she came out like 1 month after her release, has been pretty much the most overused troop in the entire game. I'm actually surprised she's not anymore, though if we looked at other data, she still might be. But yes, Valkyrie, she has been notorious for being the most overused. The main reason for this is back in the day, for almost a year straight, she was the only troop in the entire game that could actually accumulate souls, so that alone made her excessively overused. Another reason why she's really overused, she's one of the 6 core convert troops that are able to convert any color of her choice to a specific color, in this case blue. And everyone on console and who have seen the Freeze team, the Justice team, whatever people call it these days, know how overused she is with that. The core teams that she's generally ran with is corvax, Valkyrie, Justice, Queen Mab. It is very, very overused on console, still used quite a bit on PC Mobile, and is a very, very solid team due to how Justice scales with Freeze and just the amount of blues that Valkyrie can accumulate. She's used in a lot of true damage teams because most true damage teams need blue mana to be able to function, mainly things like Draculus, Oriali, Crimson Bats, a good majority of the true damage troops that hit all enemies. I believe Marilith might be like the only one that hits all enemies that doesn't actually do it. Corvax, all of those end up needing a Valkyrie on their team to be able to function. And as far as traits, what makes her pretty nice as well is she's one of only, oh, actually there's kind of 3. Yeah, there's 2 of them that give it, there's 3 of the convert troops that have a link on them, and she's one of 2 that gives it to the specific color that she spawns. So of course Valkyrie's a red-yellow that spawns blue mana, and her link is to blue. Another one that is like this is Giant Spider, which has a 13 mana cost, so it makes it a little bit harder to do. But Giant Spider also has the +1 purple onto the purple that it spawns. and the other one is an alchemist. So the alchemist has a red, which gives it to itself instead of its spawn. But yeah, it's one of only two, and of the two, it has the lowest mana cost. So because of that, she gets used a lot. Because the giant spider, as I mentioned, has a 13 mana cost, whereas Valkyrie's only 10. So the fact that it spawns at +1 into her color that she actually creates is a pretty huge deal, and she is the only one that actually does it. Alchemist does it to itself. Giant Spider has a 13 mana cost, so it's not applicable, or as applicable. And she also has Mana Shield, which isn't as important, but of course against Queen Mab and stuff like that is pretty potent. So number 2, I believe this is the one that might surprise some people. It is a Mercy. This is a troop I actually do not advise if you are extremely early in the game, mainly because a good majority of the stuff she actually synergizes with is much later in the game. Mercy is the only empowered troop in the game. She does have empowered, meaning she can cast her ability from the first turn, that can convert a color into another color. In this specific instance, she converts purple into yellow. This is very, very, very important in many ways. For one, purple. Purple tends to be a pretty overused color, mainly because a lot of things in purple does have a very high damage output. This is also particularly useful for countering Elamagrim and giant spider related teams that will be spawning a lot of purple onto the board. But the main thing that's used for is the yellow mana generation. As I mentioned, it's the only convert, so you will be able to get a very, very large amount of yellow mana. And what will you do with all this mana? You will put a lot of good legends and mythics on your team that utilize it, which is why it's not really used early on in the game. You don't really have the mana capacity with large, good casts to be able to use it with, because you kind of need legends and mythics to synergize it with. But this thing synergizes with a good majority of endgame content. Most notably a Gorgotha, just Mercy into a Gorgotha, and then boom, you just got yourself essentially your whole team full of mana from turn 1, and you might even extra turn off of everything you do, so you just keep getting it, and it works out really, really nice. A lot of really high damage output. As far as yellows end up using it, of course, basically anything with like a 15 or higher mana pool for yellow will end up using it. Great Maul uses it. There's definitely not a lack of options to be able to synergize with a Mercy. And on top of all of that, she also has a Cleanse All to allies, which, given that she starts with Empowered, you can just save this if you truly wanted to, and use it simply as an automatic cleanse to get rid of Death Marks, to get rid of Freeze, to get rid of Stun, to get rid of really any annoying status effect that you might have on you whenever you want. And that is a really good utility just as a support troop. And on top of all that, it also has a life gain to the weakest, and this is specifically noteworthy that it says the weakest ally. What weakest is whatever one has the lowest durability, the lowest armor plus HP combined, so whatever is being hit the most will end up getting the HP, and of course whatever has the lowest durability is likely the one that needs to heal the most. So Mercy works out pretty well for keeping all of your troops alive, which is good for Guild Wars, even though she isn't really used within Guild Wars, but it's also really good for just making sure you don't lose. It keeps up a really high win rate, and it's just an all-around, basically perfect support troop. Everything you would ever need from a support troop, she does. She even has traits that support your allies on top of everything else as well. So, number 1. I think you all know what this is by now. Yeah. It is Christinex. Yeah, that's no surprise, really. Christinex. I've mentioned this a lot as the most powerful troop in the game, and this data says the exact same thing. It's very, 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 very strong. It deals above average damage to all enemies, boosted by a chosen color, so even more on top of that, at a 2-to-1 ratio, which is a decent ratio, not the best ratio out there, but 2-to-1, so if you end up removing 10 gems, that's 5 additional damage, and of course, even though that's only 5 additional damage, that's technically 20 additional damage because you're dealing it to all enemies, so assuming they're all alive, you will be doing it to all of them. So really decent damage output. That alone, if its ability stopped at just that, it would be fine. But then it also has the board control. Of course, you get to choose that color, and then all of them get removed. So you have board control, and that would also be a perfect ability. And then on top of that, it also has a summon. So it pretty much covers everything you need except for, I guess, mana generation. But with board control, you kind of already get the mana generation. And it lacked mana generation, boom, crystallized. And then whenever it takes a purple, it gains mana every single turn. It's also quite unique in that it is currently the only troop in the entire game that has an enchant that can be applied without actually using your turn. Every other enchant currently in the game, you have to waste your turn to apply. This can be done for an extra turn by either swiping a purple and then that lands into an extra turn, or simply swiping a 4 times purple, which will of course give it to you for free from your extra turn. And what enchant does is give 2 mana every single turn to the troop, which allows you to use X even if it's fully being blocked by other colors. It also allows you to get really good value out of using 2 or 3 X's, or even 4 if you really wanted to, within a team, because for every single crystallize, you're gaining 2 mana per turn. So if you have, for example, 3 X's on your team, you're gaining 6 mana per turn by doing literally nothing. You could take a color you don't even use, and you're still gaining 6 mana per turn. So that is pretty decent. And of course, even just with 1, that's 2 mana per turn. That's almost like the same as the swiping, and really, really efficient. It has stone skin, so you can use it as a tank. You can use it as a second slot. You can use it. It's really a troop that can be used pretty much optimally in every single slot on your team. There really isn't a place that is wrong to put a X. Every single spot that you can possibly do is a viable spot. They might change slightly as far as where the most viable spot is, depending on what team you're using, but there really isn't a wrong location. And on top of all that, it also is nimble, which isn't too applicable. It's probably the weakest thing it has, but it does have immune to entangle, so if they're running some kind of entangle team, you'll have immunity to it and still be able to apply your skull damage. So anyways, yeah, those are the top 10 troops in the game. I probably would have made a fairly similar list if I was to just list out the top 10. One thing I did notice, 2 things that were actually not on here that are worth mentioning as ones that didn't actually make it, but are, of course, worth mentioning. There probably are a few others as well, but Scion. Of course, Scion, everyone knows how bad this is in Guild Wars right now. Mainly the thing that makes Scion annoying right now is his final trait, steal enemy mana when dealing skull damage. Of course, this can be negated, as I said earlier, with an entangle, but if you don't have the proper disable, it can be very annoying. You can't silence it because it has immune to it. Gains additional mana on top of that. It also has a drain on its ability, so not only will it steal all of your mana from the skull, it will then go and then steal all of your mana on all of your troops with its actual cast. And the other noteworthy one is a Queen Mab. Queen Mab, not as great as it used to be in the past, still really applicable though. It mana burns all enemy. What this does is whatever what their current mana is, it takes that value and then applies her magic to it. So for example, I have 20. Let's say I was using this on something with 10 mana currently, 10 out of 15. That would then do 30 damage, 20 because of her magic, 10 because it currently has 10 mana out of its maximum of 15. It does it based on its current mana, not its max mana. And it then gains an extra turn if there's 13 or more blue, and of course, what gets used with it? Valkyrie, which is also why Valkyrie is used up, or is one of the more popular ones as well. Valkyrie is generally used with Queen Mab, but unlike a Queen Mab, Valkyrie is also used with many other teams. The main core thing that Queen Mab is used for, though, among everything, is the fact that she has her final trait, Winter Veil. It's the best way to freeze enemies currently, as far as any freezing option. It has, of course, whenever she takes an extra turn, will end up freezing them. This is pretty good because whenever a troop is frozen, it will not be able to gain extra turns. And essentially, if you freeze the entire enemy team, assuming they have every color, every extra turn they take will do nothing. So it's pretty useful. It's the main reason it's not used as much anymore is there's now a trait, the Mana Shield, which prevents them from being mana burned. On top of this, just freezes. This isn't as effective as it used to be anymore. For one, Gorgotha now has Cleanse, and many of the teams that do end up running mana generation these days, at least on the defend aspect, end up running with a Ragnagord or some kind of explosion or some kind of alternative mean, like a X, of gaining mana. There isn't really as much need these days to freeze them. There still are instances, like for example, Infinite Loop teams that are running like Green Seer Giant Spider with like Double Kraken or something. Those, of course, you'll want to use a Queen Mab on because you'll be able to get good value out of freeze. But a lot of the stuff starting to be used now doesn't really get countered by freeze, but it's worth noting because the meta may change, and in the future, she might become just as powerful as she used to be in the past. Anyways, that'll wrap it up for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you still have any other questions about any of the troops, which ones are viable, stuff like that, or just anything in general for Gems of War, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.